Welcome back to Martins and More. My name is Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And we have 45 things to talk about today, Spoon. What's going on?
Well, it is going to be a very nice day talking about one of the iconic guitars ever made, one of the iconic musical instruments ever made. Very nice.
The Martin D-45. Buckle up, folks. It's going to be a really good show. And we have to thank our good friend Colin for suggesting this episode. We hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, mate. Colin is an Englishman. And I would say, publicly for the record, he is the reason I follow West Ham United. He grew up near the old West Ham Stadium in East London, though he now lives in the West Country, and has himself some mighty fine left-handed Martins. So thanks, Colin. It was great to hear from you, and I really appreciate the suggestion.
Go football. I am so excited to talk about this guitar because I finally have one.
That's right. Maury Rutch has a D-45 that his better half, Lori, basically gave him for Christmas.
Better half? That's debatable. No, it's not.
Don't call for a vote.
We just checked with everyone, and it's not debatable.
So congratulations. And from what I've heard already on the shows you've been putting up on YouTube, you've got a spectacular one, which I guess one would expect with a Martin D-45.
Thank you so much. I really am blessed. I'm having so much fun with it. And depending on how well you know me from real life or from these programs, I have always wanted a D-45. Ever since I found out about Martin guitars, that was the top of the mountain. And I won't tell you that I've struggled and reached for it and spent 30 years trying to get one, literally. But as soon as I recognized what a Martin guitar is, that's the one that I had in the back of my mind. Someday I'm going to have one of them. Fast forward to 2003, we become a Martin guitar dealer. That wasn't the first order of business, and a lot of you guys listening to this show, if you own your own business, you recognize the first thing you do is not start buying toys for yourself. So that wasn't on my radar early, but I could not let any more time go by. When I finally had the opportunity to drop the necessary hints, we can get into the nuts and bolts of it along the way through this program, but I got to tell you, when I finally knew that I had to finally make this dream a reality, I'm extremely, extremely lucky that my wife did not disagree.
You said it. So I know there's a lot of guitar lovers out there who have wives that are not necessarily as enthusiastic or supportive, but you know, there are others, there certainly are. But you certainly have a winner, and you now own a winner in that D-45. So what is the year of production of this D-45?
This is a 2021. We took delivery of this early 2022, but the guitar was built in 2021.
Ah, that's fascinating.
It could be a trivia question, but I kind of gave the answer before I gave the question. As you know, Spoon, an interesting thing about production at Martin, as soon as the guitar neck is chosen for the build, it's given a serial number, it's matched up with the body of the guitar, and then they both go their separate ways for weeks and months. It's entirely possible the guitar was being built in December of 2021, not completed until 2022. That's going to have a 2021 number.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and that's very common when it comes to guitars that are stamped at the end of the year. And makes me think back to 1929 when they made the first OM28s. There were 11 that were stamped in 1929. Doesn't mean they weren't, all finished in 1929 and ended up in some dealer's hands. That model didn't appear in the catalog until 1930. But so same thing with your guitar. So it was made late 2021, or at least it was stamped in late 2021. That's very cool. So, Maury, maybe you should tell us, now that you are a bona fide member of the Order of the Lucky Dog and a verified registered owner of a Martin D-45, all about the Martin D-45 and what you love about it and why you wanted to get one, and what you've learned since you've been able to play one so frequently.
Well, before I go further, you must be an honorary member of the Lucky Dog to listen to this program. So if you don't own a D-45, cover your ears. Of course, I'm kidding.
No, not true, not true. But please, you have the floor.
Thank you. All you have to do to listen to this program is to share a love for the D-45 that like we do. And this is a guitar, it's not very far off from an HD-28, a D-41, a D-42. Most of these podcasts, Spoon and I spend a lot of time dealing with the facts, the figures, all the specifications, and some of that still holds true for what I love about my D-45, but more of it is really just the emotion of it and always wanting something. And I'll be really transparent. Back in November of 2022, Martin sent out a bulletin to the dealer network telling us, effective November 1st, 2022, Martin can no longer guarantee Sitka spruce tops. Production models from Martin that are spec'd for a Sitka spruce top could have either Sitka spruce or Lutz spruce. And that's the topic for its own podcast some other day. But the point being, if I wanted to buy a D-45 and guarantee that I was going to get one the way that they've been doing it, and of course that could be traced backwards. If I'm being really picky, we can go back to when Brazilian changed to East Indian. We can go back to when Adirondack changed to Sitka. But long story short, I got it in my mind, wait, what if I don't act now and I wait another couple of years and I get a guitar that has a Lutz spruce top? Doesn't mean it's going to automatically be worse, but it's automatically going to be different. And in my short, sweet lifetime that I've always looked forward to having a D-45, my mind told me it was an East Indian Rosewood Sitka Dreadnought. This might be all something we could all laugh about in a couple of years, and maybe I acted a little bit too emotionally too quickly, but that set the clock in motion. And going from the nice gradual feeling I had becoming a dealer in 2003, thinking to myself, I can get a D-45 anytime I want, there's no rush. I'll be honest with you guys, there was a little bit of an emotional rush to me to want to get one that was guaranteed to have a Sitka top. Now the joke's on me if these next 2 or 3 years, every D-45 we see has Sitka, then I jumped the gun too quickly. But it really set everything in motion as far as what I wanted. And what I love about this D-45 is it's a 2021. It has the solid Sitka spruce top. It has the East Indian Rosewood back and sides. And collected into that whole memory of what I think a D-45 is, speaking about Martin guitars in current production, that's what I've always been looking for. So that's really the heart of what made me act so quickly. And it's a little bit funny because I just mentioned that to Lori, and she said, well, that makes sense. Don't wait. What if in 10 years we're not even a dealer anymore and we've retired and now you got to buy guitars at retail? What would you do then? And I said, hey, I couldn't do that to you. You should let me buy one now at wholesale when they're still Sitka. And we had a little bit of a laugh. And it's, I sort of could use the ammunition. I haven't done this to her every 2 years since '03. It's not like I continually ship guitars to customers all day long, and at the end of the week, I buy one for me. I haven't done this since we've been a dealer, so it was one of those things. I built up lots of goodwill, and that's really what brought me to owning one at this stage. I certainly, could make the argument it could have happened earlier, and of course it could have waited, but I'm just so lucky that I've just turned my dream into something real. And I haven't really been separated from it. I play it every day.
Wow, that's a great story. It's a great story about a great guitar. Like I said, I've heard it through the internet already, and am just very, very impressed with the three-dimensional tone and the power and the deep down darkness of the rosewood and the warmth of the Sitka and all that. And it's entirely possible, since you brought it up, that the Sitka spruce white spruce hybrid called Lutz, there I think in German it's Lutz spruce, is may sound unrecognizably different from Sitka, but I totally understand why you would want what you have always imagined and what you've always played and what you've seen other people play, and there I've certainly experienced some absolutely wonderful D-45s made of Brazilian and Sitka spruce. So today's D-45, as you pointed out, is made with Indian rosewood and a spruce top, and in your case, Sitka spruce top. For people who are not that familiar with the D-45, it is the top of the line Martin guitar in the standard series. In the days before they had things like standard series, and all there were the basic standard models. The D-45 was always the king of the hill. And we'll get more into history of D-45 later. But it's now the flagship of the standard series that sets the standard for what a top professional level flat top acoustic guitar should be. So what are the other specs about the D-45, and why is it considered the top of the line of the standard series?
All right, let's get down to it. The specs of the D-45, you can't argue with these folks. And if any of you guys are sneaking around, hiding in the bushes, ready to wave your mahogany flag, sit down. This is time for rosewood, and you're going to like it. The rosewood D-45 is solid East Indian rosewood back and sides, solid Sitka spruce top, bound fingerboard, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous hexagon inlays. I know some people listening to this program prefer snowflakes. Hexagons are the way to go. You got the beautiful C Martin F logo. I guess it's the block logo they call it on the headstock. And in short, it's just the D-45 that I saw David Crosby, Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, Neil Young. When I look at this instrument, specs aside, that's what I think of as soon as I see it. But you make a good point. When we talk about specs, some people might be asking, in 2023, as we're recording this, how different is this guitar from a D42? You could even say D41, make the argument about HD28. Martin made the conscious effort in 2018 to reimagine the entire standard series, and with that, they brought all four of these guitars forward-shifted scallop bracing. So 4 or 5 years ago, you could have made the argument that an HD28 sounds a little bit different from a D42, sounds different from a D45, and we can go into those differences as we go through the program. But the 2023 specs on the D45, it's forward-shifted scallop bracing on the full dreadnought depth body with that big cavernous East Indian rosewood sound chamber and the really warm, lush, syrupy, brothy spruce top. To me, it's just so thick and like gooey and just
It's not a candy bar.
It's like a Snickers. Stupid food analogies aside, it's just a really thick, punchy dreadnought tone. And do you have to go to the D45 to get these sounds? Not necessarily. You can make the argument the 41 and 42, boy, they are, if you call them lesser guitars because of the cost, I suppose you'd have to, but they wouldn't be called lesser anything in any other argument. But the D45 is just the most ornate, big, filthy, nasty dreadnought sound you can get in the Martin Standard series. It's just the specs don't lie.
Well, I'll agree with you, though. The way you describe it with that Indian rosewood and Sitka, what I call the brothy, like, it's meaty. It's like a stew thickness to it, and yet at the same time, it is quite beautiful and quite pretty, and has a great deal of shimmer in the voice, and has an enormous amount of complexity in it. And one of the things that does set it apart from the 42 and the 41 and the 28 is the pearl that you just referred to. It is a style 45, has that beautiful high-colored abalone inlay, not just around the edge of the top and not just on the fretboard and the rosette, but it has it inlaid along the edge of the side and the back and the end block and the end pieces, they call it, where the end pin goes, and the V-shaped heel of the neck, where the neck attaches to the body. And the 42 and the 45 share in common the fret insula, as I call it, the pearl that comes down around the fretboard and actually comes and melds with the rosette. All just absolutely fabulous. The multicolored wood fiber backstrip that has been associated with Style 45 for decades, and just a gorgeous thing. The other thing that sets the D45 apart is the woods. The woods themselves are the most top shelf, highest grade woods. Up until modern times, They would call that grade 8. They might still call it grade 8 at the factory, but now they really just refer to premium and regular or premium standard woods. 42s and 45s get premium, but I'll flat guarantee you to this day at the factory, there will be spruce tops and rosewood backs and sides that the people who are grading the wood will say that's a 45. And it's just some really wonderful wood. Of course, they consider just cosmetic grading. I know that they grade based on color variation. They want as much even color. They want grain evenness. Of course, these are all natural, organic things, these solid wood plates. So you will definitely have variation. And there's some argument to say that, what you would have seen on a 45 in the early 70s will look more perfect than what you get today based on the natural resources availability. But you're still talking about the best, highest grade wood that they can offer you. Solid ebony, bridge and fingerboard, usually flawless. Those big, juicy berries of abalone, highly colored abalone inlays, the hexagon inlays on the fretboard, and the classic C. Martin F. headstock, as you mentioned. All absolutely lovely. And 2018, with your Reimagined series, they went from a bright, stark white of a plastic spoon to antique white, which is I don't know if you would want to call it bluish or grayish off-white, that is not quite so stark and was originally developed to give the look of the bindings on Martins from the 1950s and 1960s. So you have antique white binding, and then you also now get open back golden tuners, vintage style tuners, where the earlier D-45 pre-2018 still had the closed back tuners. And those tuners are reminiscent of the D-45V from the vintage series. And as a lot of people know, when they reimagined the standard series, they brought over various specs from the vintage series models, whether it was the HD28, the D18, the 0018, and so forth. And they did that with the D-45 as well. So the two things that really came over from that series were the open back vintage style tuners and the forward shifted bracing. That forward shifted scallop bracing, it definitely makes a difference in that wonderful, lush, rumbly sound that we get out of your guitar. The previous D28s were rear shifted, and I always liked the sound of that. I liked the sound of rear shifted HD28s and D45s and D41s. The D42 was always forward shifted bracing in the modern era, but they brought the 41 and the 45 forward, as you said at the beginning of the program. And these guys together sound similar, but I'm one of the people who's thoroughly convinced the D45 with that abalone pearl inlaid around the sides and the back have something different going on. Stephen Stills famously said on a television program, Nightline, when they were doing an expose on Martin guitar and the creation of the Stephen Stills first signature model, he said that a guitar is a box that rattles, and everything that you do to that guitar affects how beautifully it rattles. And one of the things they do with Style 45 is they inlay the pearl inside a trench. And so they carve out what seems to us an extremely shallow little strip. But if you get down into microscope level, you're talking about a significant channel cut in to, let's say, the spruce top that they do for most Martin guitars, right where it's connected to the sides by the cedar kerfing that's inside that it rests on. And that basically allows the top to be a little more flexible than a top that doesn't have that channel cut into it. Even when you then fill it in with other stuff, that spruce is thinner right where it's connecting at the end. And since it's like a diaphragm of a drum, and so that makes it a little more flexible, which should result in greater resonance. And you take that, and now you do it to the rosewood sides and the rosewood back. So they too will flex differently or more easily when contacted by sound waves. So I'm thoroughly convinced, and I discovered this long ago, that the D-45s sound different because of that. And years ago, I would go to guitar stores and I would play D-28s, which I loved, and I would play D-45s. And I noticed this consistent change. And I didn't necessarily like it. I mean, people accuse me on guitar forums of, you're just imagining it because it's so beautiful. I actually preferred the 28 sound because that's the sound that I grew up listening to. And that was the sound to me of what a Martin guitar should sound like. And there was something that I now refer to as shimmer to it, which is evocative of the shiny pearl, I realize. But there is something in the voice when a chord sustains. When you first ring a chord and it's bouncing off the walls of the room, all that stuff, there is just a little something extra. I know a friend of ours from Martin Fest said that when he's at Martin Fest and we're in rooms with people playing guitars, he said, I can always recognize a pearl encrusted 45 when my back's turned. And I believe him. So I know as a dealer, you can't honestly say that. Martin will never, ever say anything about things like that affecting tone. My question for people who don't believe it is, why would it not? When with just about anything you do to a guitar can affect its tone. So I envy you tremendously for the opportunity to own such a guitar with such high-level woods, with the modern version with the forward-shifted scallop bracing and the open back tuners. Just terrific, just terrific.
Well, thank you. And listening to you talk about all these specs does bring back a really good memory. And maybe the lesson here is be patient. Good things come to those who wait. Back when I really, really wanted a D-45 even more than I did now, there were some different specs for sure. I remember falling in love with Allen's HD28V at the very first Martin Fest. I'm not sure if you were in that circle, but a lot of people recognize, like, why is Maury making those puppy dog eyes for that guy's guitar? He's not going to give it to him. But the HD28V was my first encounter with forward-shifted scallop bracing, East Indian Sitka, all the way back in 2002. And up until 2018, the D-45 had a 1 11/16 inch nut. So if I wouldn't have waited, I would have had a nut width that I don't necessarily prefer, and I would have had a bracing that was different. Spoon, can you remember what the bracing was on a D-45 before it was reimagined?
Yes, yeah, it had the same bracing as the HD28 in those days. So it had what they considered the modern bracing, which was a little forward from rear-shifted bracing of the 1940s and 50s, and definitely farther away from the sound hole than forward-shifted bracing. So it's closer to the bridge plate. So the bridge plate area is around the top is less flexible, and it has a different sound to the bass and to the resonance itself. It's really a combination of extra resonance and really extra resonance of the bass frequencies. I've been happy with those kind of guitars, the D-45s from that era. I've played some that are wonderful. Prior to that, the D-45, when it was brought back in modern times, did not have scallop bracing originally. The scallop bracing came in I'm pretty sure, 1986. But by the era that you're talking about, they had scallop bracing, standard series scallop bracing, but it was in the modern rear position. And the HD28V would have had the forward-shifted bracing that the vintage series got, which I think just turns up the resonance and accentuates the what I call the undertone of the bass, not necessarily the bass notes per se. And yes, and I'm glad you pointed out the neck width, because in 2018, with the Reimagined Standard Series, the series was basically standardized to have the new modern high-performance neck, which has a modified low oval profile and the high-performance taper. So it's virtually identical to the neck you were describing that ended at 1 11/16 inch. They just cheat the the area out down by the first 3 frets a little bit, giving you a little more room down there for thumb fretting and for bar chording and for, basic chords in general. And it's been a big success. It was controversial at the time, but what Martin was basically doing was moving to the industry standard, because many, 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 many other dealers out there, makers of guitars, had gone to a 1 3/4 inch nut width, but that remains sleek up the neck. So it is 1 3/4 at the nut and 2 1/8 at the 12th fret. So by the time you get up to the 12th fret, you're just like the old 1/11/16 inch neck. So sleeker, faster up the neck. The reason they went with the modified low oval, it was because, according to Tim Teal and Scott Sasser, that was the number one request of people of the custom shop, was to change from the low profile or the modified V-neck to the modified low oval. And so they finally decided, with Mr. Martin's approval, to make that the standard neck now for the standard series and almost every other guitar made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and below the standard series, like the 16s, 17s, and so forth. So you have the modern D-45 that is not entirely, ironically, still has some vintage D-45 aspects to it. So very cool indeed.
It's funny you say Scott Sasser and Tim Teal. I was just down at Martin a couple weeks ago with both of those guys in the custom shop. I told them the same story about the reason Lori let me get a D45 now was because you're changing from guaranteeing Sitka spruce to the possibility of Lutz, and they both at the same time laughed and said, "You're welcome."
Well, we'll see. You talked about you jumping the gun. You may start playing some of these Lutz D45s and say, wow, I could have had one of those. So, but from my understanding of it, they're extremely similar. So some people say that Lutz sounds a little more like Engelmann, but it still has what's important is that it has the volume, the attack ceiling and power of Sitka. And they're probably going to be interchangeable. But I don't blame you at all for wanting what you wanted to have. There's been a number of D45s over the years, and some of them have all been just stamped D45 because of how it's changed, and others are because of models like D45V, and other series, and back before they had them corralled into series, including signature models and all that. So it's really a wonderful legacy, and frankly, you have I wouldn't say renewed my faith, but confirmed my faith in Martin making some of the best guitars they've ever made right here and now. Because again, I was just so impressed with the sound of that guitar when you were playing it on your Martin versus Martin. So I highly recommend people go there after they listen to this podcast and listen to that guitar and that wonderful, deep, full, powerful, complex, beautiful tone. I mean, Maury wants to call it dirty and nasty. It certainly can growl and get down, but it's also just quite angelic. But maybe it's one of those angels with a big flaming sword in its hand, because it is a powerhouse
Thank you.
of tone.
Part of the attraction to do this episode was Colin asking us to speak about this stuff. And I remember reading an email from him. He made a good point and is curious about the Mike Longworth connection here. What can you tell us, Spoon, about when they went away and how they came back?
I'll go back to begin with Style 45. The first Style 45s weren't actually Style 45. They were 0042 Special. That was a 12 fret 00. I meant to look this up, 1905, 1909. I think the first one may have been made in 1902 even. 12 fret 00, Style 42 was the fanciest pearl ornate guitar at the time. And this one had extra pearl, and it also had a mandolin, like an Italian mandolin pickguard under the strings. Big decorative tortoiseshell pickguard with this extremely ornate, I don't know if you would call it a Rococo design in beautiful pearl, and with the pearl on the back and sides. And so Frank Henry Martin or somebody working for him had made the decision that they were going to move into doing that with other guitars. And then the first 45s started showing up. Jump to 1933. Well, I guess 1931 was when Martin started making the Dreadnought and selling it under its own brand. They had been making big 12-fret Dreadnoughts since the teens, but they were sold exclusively through the Ditson Guitar Company. And so they're making their own Dreadnoughts, and the very famous superstar of that time, Gene Autry, the cowboy singer and actor, asked Mr. Martin to make him one of those new giant guitars, because Dreadnoughts, you have to remember, were totally dwarfing everything else that Martin had been putting out under their own brand. So in 1933, Gene Autry had the first official D-45 made with his name in script up the fretboard, and they ultimately made a wonderful Indian Sitka commemoration model years ago. And I know one of them existed in the Gene Autry Museum, which is sadly closed, but and I know somebody who owns one who absolutely loves it. That was the first D-45. The country star named, let me see if I can remember what his name is. I was going to say
Kenny Chesney.
Yeah, no, no. Jackie Kidmore also had a 12-fret D-45 made, and then they started making the 14-fret D-45s. Now, these first D-45s had snowflake inlay on them, what Style 45 had always had up until that time across the 20s and 30s, and when you're talking about the 0045s and those kind of guitars. And the original OM45 Deluxe had that as well. The D-45 had that, I think, only for the first year, and then moved to the hexagons. The hexagons came from Martin's, at the time, their most expensive guitar was the F9, which was one of their jazz archtop guitars. Those jazz archtop guitars cost more than the flat tops. So it was really the top of the line in the 1930s. And they took that block headstock, the C Martin F, pearl headstock, and the hexagon inlays, and moved it over onto the OM45 and the D-45, the big 14-fret wondrous D-45. Originally, the D-45s weren't considered uniquely special, so they just used the same wood they were using for the 28s. But not long into that, they realized what they were onto, and that's when they started saving the best wood for Style 45 guitars. And there were other stars that had them. They only made a total of 91 D-45s, and when they were retired in 1939, the onset of the Second World War and the austerity that was happening. And only, as far as I know, only 3 of them were 12-fret guitars. There's multiple D-45 S guitars. One of them was 12-fret, but the S didn't mean standard body size 12-fret back then. It meant special order. So there are 2 that were made with an extra wide top, which was ultimately recreated as an authentic series model. One of those 2 had an extra, a deeper body. And then they also had made one left-handed D-45. And I've only gotten to see a couple of these D-45s in real life, and they're awesome. They're absolutely awesome. And the one at the museum is a fine example. And that one's from 1942. So I guess they ended, I'm sorry, not in 39. 39 is when they changed the neck width. In 1942 were the last D-45s made. And then all the pearl went away. There were no more 40s, 41s, 42. Well, 41 didn't exist then. No more 42s, no more 45s. In those days, the 42 was totally different than the modern 42. It had didn't have the same number of fret markers. They had snowflake fret markers that started at the 5th fret. They looked very different from the modern style 42s. So now we jump to people really asking Martin to bring back pearl trim. And a lot of big singing stars in Nashville and other places were paying artisans to take their Martin D-45, or in some cases even a D-35, and embellish it with pearl inlay to various degrees of audaciousness and sometimes ugliness even. But some of it looked really great, and some of these people were wonderful artisans. And one of them was Mike Longworth, who was down in Tennessee doing this. And so Martin hired him to come back to Martin in 1968 to inlay 2 prototype guitars, dreadnoughts. These were they were still using Brazilian rosewood at that time. The pre-war 45s were all Brazilian rosewood with Adirondack red spruce tops. The 1968 and 69 D-45s have Brazilian rosewood back and sides and European spruce tops. They called it German spruce in those days. That actually meant that it was purchased from a dealer in West Germany. There's no way for them to know whether it was Swiss alpine spruce or Italian alpine spruce. It's possible it could have been German, but as I understand it, instrument grade wood had been completely cut out, just like Adirondack was in the United States, because its a unique strength and cross-grain properties made it very good for struts in airplanes and gliders and stuff, of which those countries made zillions. There is a rumor that it was actually East German spruce that was illegally smuggled from the other side of the Iron Curtain. And there is some credence to that. It definitely was available for sale in New York City in those days. So it's possible the European spruce on those D-45s was technically actually German spruce. So the major difference between the D-45 from 1942 and Mike Longworth's D-45 was a suggestion made by, I used to know this guy's name, somebody who helped and was helped make those guitars, and that is the end block. The pearl around the end block is a true rectangle with pearl, all the way around, and that makes it different from a pre-war D-45, so that people could not try to distress a modern day D-45 and change the tutors and whatnot and try to sell it as a pre-war D-45.
Oh, wow.
And Martin likes to do that. They will do little subtle things like that when it comes to particularly 45s. And sometimes they don't mention what it is, but they know what it is. And they probably didn't mention that either. I think other people just knew what they're talking about, figured that out. So the D-45 then switched to Indian rosewood in 1970. And there's rumors that some Brazilian got over into 1970, but that's, as far as we know, is not true at all. I do not have the date of when they switched to Sitka, but it was around that time, shortly thereafter. For the top, these guitars were made with straight braces. They did not have scallop bracing. Neither did the D-42 when it first came out. When not that long afterwards, people were asking for, two things happened. One is people were asking for the snowflakes of the early D-45s. And so Mike Longworth offered the suggestion of, why don't we make a new guitar that has the snowflakes of a pre-war D-45, but not put the pearl on the back and sides, so that it'd be more affordable and will be definitely different from the 45s and keep the 45 special. And that was then renamed the D-42 because Style 42 was long ago retired, and that made sense to them. The D-41 followed later on, and that was another attempt to offer Pearly Martin similar to the D-45, but not as special. And it had lower grade woods. They're still higher than Style 28 and 35 woods. It also had hexagons that, at first, they left the hexagon off of the first fret, and then they changed it and went with smaller hexagons. So the D-41 has always had smaller hexagons. It also does not have pearl around the fret insula. But they were still very similar to the D-45 in that they had rear shifted or modern shifted non-scallop bracing. And I'm pretty sure the D-45 went to scallop bracing in 1986. These all had the 1 11th 16th inch necks. They would have been thicker necks. They also had large maple bridge plates, and which changes the sound, so they have a unique sound. And that would include the modern those modern Brazilian D-45s have big maple rosewood bridge plates. So don't let anybody tell you that it ruins the sound of a Martin guitar. Maury and I are quite familiar with one of those Brazilian that used to be owned by David Soul, the actor, and was bought by a Martin Fest friend of ours. And Tim Perry, I think if he had been in Las Vegas, he would have, or Reno, he would have tried to marry it. But but it was so. So quickly we're coming up to what became the modern D-45. So the D-45 became the top of the line. Everybody wanted one. Lots and lots of. I mean, Jimi Hendrix had one. So everybody wanted a D-45. And they did come out with a D-45 SS, I think it was called, which is a 12 fret with extra pearl around the headstock and stuff. And we have a good friend, Martin Fest friend, who owns one of those. And they have a paddle headstock. They have a modern headstock instead of the slotted headstock. So, and there have been various special D-45s that have come out over the time, but the main one, the one that is now considered the standard series, remained the top of the line. I'm blanking out now, but I bet you listeners on Facebook and YouTube versions of this podcast will start just popping out people who own D-45s. It is true that Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young all bought one from those first batches, that first batch of production. Stephen Stills, of course, being the guru that can turn them all on to the pre-war Martins. He owns a 1939 D-45, and as well as other ones. His signature model was really the first time Martin tried to make a recreation of a pre-war guitar. And there's plenty of things that are different from that in a real pre-war D-45, but they're still absolutely fantastic guitars. Then they came out with the D-45 Golden Era, which first they came out with D-45V, Vintage Series, V-neck, 1 11/16 inch V-neck, Sitka, forward-shifted Sitka, Snowflakes. That's the guitar that was then evolved into Maury's guitar. Changed the neck, put on the hexagons, changed the binding from grain to ivory to antique white, and put on the vintage tuners. But in terms of the real guts, that forward-shifted scallop bracing is what really drives that engine. So I have to say right here and now, stop the presses. We're not going to go any farther until we discuss the D-45 Modern Deluxe. Our friend Colin in England, who recommended this topic, is a huge fan of the Modern Deluxe series, and he's also a huge fan of the D-45. And the D-45 Modern Deluxe just came out in 2022, and I think it's entirely possible that it's only a matter of time, no pressure, Colin, no pressure, before the twain shall meet in his hands. A D-45 Modern Deluxe just might have to be in his future.
Oh man, if I'm being really honest, that's the one guitar that might make me regret having a D-45 not Modern Deluxe. That thing is amazing.
Absolutely true. I have to say, we knew it was coming. We finally then get to see it at the Martin Museum when I was doing my video shoot, and it just exceeded all of my expectations. Modern Deluxe, of course, has the very special features. We can kind of ping pong back and forth. I'll start with the carbon fiber bridge plate that has two thin pieces of carbon fiber over top and underneath a piece of VTS torrified Adirondack spruce is being used for the bridge plate. That's a very cool feature. Basically, it's going to preserve that bridge plate forever, protected by that carbon fiber from the ball ends of the strings. What's another fancy feature on the Modern Deluxe series?
Well, if you think having a VTS piece of Adirondack sandwiched in the bridge plate, how about the whole top? The VTS Sitka is my favorite part of the Modern Deluxe series, and it's a little bit hard to dissect because you can't take a Modern Deluxe and take the bridge plate away, take other things away. But I think the fact that that top is VTS Sitka really, really makes that thing sing. What else do you know about the Modern Deluxe?
Well, you're going to talk about the Sitka top, which, by the way, as everybody's been told, the tops could be Sitka or they could be Lutz or Lutz spruce in the future. Very similar to Sitka. It's a hybrid, natural hybrid of Sitka and white spruce that a lot of people love. So Martin's going to start using that interchangeably, even on the Modern Deluxe series, it looks like. But I'm going to jump to the underside of the top because of the golden era style scalloping on the Adirondack spruce bracing that is supporting that spruce top. That was designed for the old golden era series. It has more scalloping to it that's take away more wood than the standard scalloping that you get out of the standard series to increase flexibility and resonance. Next.
We're not out of specs yet. My garden variety D45 came with crappy plastic bridge pins until our pal Marshall Fleischer birthday gifted me an awesome set of ivory pins from our other friend, Dave Musselwhite. This is the name-dropping part of the show if you haven't recognized it yet. But I think the Lux bridge pins, liquid metal pins in the Modern Deluxe D45, are the next awesome feature that we cannot forget to talk about.
Yeah, liquid metal is a brand name for a man-made type of metallic glass. It actually has the molecular structure of some kind of glass, but it's still metal. And what's so cool about this is it allows energy to pass through the material with no dampening effect. So you're not losing any of the energy from the strings because of the bridge pins. And it noticeably increases volume and noticeably increases sustain of the fundamental note. Not just the sustain of like letting a chord ring out, but the actual note as you hit it stays at its peak volume just a little bit longer and long enough to be noticeable. And there's such a rich, complex tone coming out of this D45 that's similar but also different from the regular D45. It's got the pearl on the back sides and top, high color abalone trim that you expect from a D45, and around the end pin box and where the neck heel joins the body, the V of the neck is of that heel has the pearl trim. It has the beautiful early 1930 and pre-1930 style 45 snowflakes. And each one of those snowflakes and diamonds and cat's eyes is outlined in pure argent white mother of pearl, which is a beautiful effect, just really stunning. And then the headstock faceplate is a pre-1930s style 45 torch. And the last time that was used on Martins was in 1930, and it was used on the OM45 Deluxe. And it is also outlined in the mother of pearl. So really stunning look. And that goes along with the neck shape that was taken from the 1930 OM45 Deluxe in the Martin Museum. You almost can't call it a V because it's a very low V, and it has this amazing asymmetrical shape to it that very subtly adds more meat to the bass side coming from the V down to the fingerboard, and a faster slope to the treble side. And it fits right in the nook of your hand just beautifully, but it also has a modern feel to it. It doesn't get thick as you go up the neck. It stays low, and that's thanks to the modern truss rod and also the modern neck heel, which is much smaller than a 30 style heel. So incredibly comfortable neck. Got the high performance taper, so you have the 1 3/4 inch at the nut, 2 1/8 at the 12th fret. So it is it's got to be my favorite Martin neck shape now, and it's currently only available on Modern Deluxe guitars or custom shop orders. But quite a piece of work, and like Maury said, he has this spectacular D45, but the D45 Modern Deluxe is indeed a modernized version of the D45, and also super deluxe version. Really cool.
And I'll admit it, now that we're talking about the Modern Deluxe version of my favorite Martin D45, I'm a little bit bummed, but I'm not, because I'm a very liquid metal, bridge pin, metallic glass, half full kind of person.
Well said, well said.
Let's pause for a moment and listen to a sound sample. This is the Martin D45.
let's see, I'll just say one more. The John Mayer D-45, Engelmann spruce top, fantastic guitar. And I know David Crosby owns more than one, so he probably has the Brazilian one with the German top, but I'm pretty sure he has others. I'm trying to think who was I most recently saw playing one. I can't think right now, but plenty of D-45s out there. And, they have been a status symbol, but they're not just a status symbol. They're not just the Cadillac or the Mercedes or the Rolls Royce of Martins. They really stand up to their reputation. A good friend of mine in New York City has an old friend, a former neighbor, or maybe an apartment building neighbor, who's an airline pilot who has a D-45 from 1981 or something like that. And it's just so three-dimensional and just has developed over the years and seasoned into just one chord, spectacular Technicolor Dreamcoat kind of sound. And so Maury has something to look forward to in his old age. So can you think of any D-45s off the top of your head that special, unique signature models, or did I run through them all?
Well, you hit most of the ones that I would have said. I'm certainly in the CSNY camp. You reminded me of the John Mayer. I did forget about him. And I'm actually remembering more back channel stories of our friends at Martin Fest than actual, famous people. But for better or worse, my mind always goes right to Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. And when I think of the D-45, I think of David Crosby. And then before I think of other artists, I start humming David Crosby songs. So I'm not going to be a lot of help. But into other genres, I know one of my favorite guitar players that I almost never mention, Ry Cooder. I've seen some videos with him. Eric Johnson. I know he's the Strat guy, yeah. But there's been some good YouTube videos of him with probably a pretty recent D-45, or at least not I don't think that's like a 30s D-45, but Ry Cooder would be one, Eric Johnson. Marty Stewart, I think. I'm not a country guy, but that sort of rings a bell.
Marty Stewart actually owns the one that is reputedly owned by Hank Williams. I'm not sure if there's any photographic provenance of Hank Williams playing a D-45 that I can remember off the top of my head, but he has Hank Sr.'s D-45. When I think of country music, Harlan Howard is a name that a lot of people don't know, but he was a Hall of Fame songwriter and actually made a very comfortable living as a song doctor. And the biggest stars you could possibly imagine would pay a fee to go visit him and have him help them with their song they were working on or tweak their song. And when you came into his office, in the waiting area for his office, or you, I guess, came into his office when he wasn't there and you were sat down in this chair that was lower than his desk, so he looked down on you, and comfy chair. But on either side of you was a Gibson J200 and a Martin D45 that you got to play in his office. And that was, the status symbols of where he was in the world. So Harlan, I definitely think about Travis Tritt had some kind of custom D45, I know. And James Taylor is supposedly had a custom D45 made for him. And Roger Waters, I know, of Pink Floyd, owns a D45. And I'm pretty sure that the Hard Rock Cafe, I think that's where Jimi Hendrix is out in Seattle. I think that's where Jimi Hendrix D45 resides.
I just thought of Tom Petty, too.
Well, that's one on me. I don't think I knew that he had a D45. There's lots of people you'll see that have D41s, and that doesn't mean they didn't own a D45, but they would take the D41 on stage. And George Jones was famous for a D41, and Dan Fogelberg, stuff like that. But that's not, again, it's not the same thing. The D45 is definitely on a pedestal all its own. And I'm sure there's many others out there that people would be able to point out, owners of D45s, not to mention, private players and players that don't necessarily want to advertise that they own a top-of-the-line Martin sitting in their home. But I guess I think of Neil Young, David Crosby, Neil Young, same thing. Neil Young, again, this is the Brazilian-German straight-braced one, but it's such a big part of his sound, just like his 30s D28, which sounds much deeper and richer and more, deeply roasted coffee kind of rosewood sound with its Adirondack spruce and its forward-shifted scallop bracing and the hide glue construction, all that stuff, and the extra years on it sound quite different from his D45, which sounds brighter and more mirrored and shimmery. but still one of, say, for me growing up and stuff, that's a quintessential sound. So once again, you and I are on the same page when it comes to that kind of stuff because of the music that we listen to. I should have said Jackson Browne when it came to the D-41, speaking of the music that we listen to.
Yeah, he has a great D-41 Sunburst I've seen on stage, and I've ogled that as well. If I wasn't going to get this, that was going to be plan B.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you could pull it off. It's a wonderful guitar. I've been lucky and going to Martin Fest and got to do a night where I was chosen to be the person to AB for a whole bunch of people, the Stephen Stills and the D-45 Golden Era, which was also Adirondack, 4-shifted Adirondack, and a big, they both of them had big 1 3/4 inch V-necks. That was certainly a treat, but also anytime I get to play somebody's D-45 is I feel extremely fortunate. And maybe someday when Maury gets an important phone call and sets his on the stand and he's not looking,
no phone call is that important.
I'll take off my big bejeweled Timex, and I don't actually own one of those, but I'll get to play Maury's D-45.
Well, true or false, I was in the custom shop a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about you, and the way that Tim Teal said your name made me think that you were in there pretty recently, too. When are we going to see the D-43 and the D-44?
Well, the D-44 would not have any pearl on it at all. Style 44 means everything that a 45 gets, but very simple, woody inlay. So I don't know if we'll ever see a D-44 unless I'm sure the custom shop has done exactly that for people in the past. A D-43, I don't know why, but that sounds like some sort of K ration from World War II. Yeah, I have a case of D-43 if anybody wants that spam. But just give me the powdered eggs.
Well, D-41, D-42, they skip right to D-45. I'm glad they did, but I don't understand why.
Well, a lot of those style names came and went over the years. So there probably was a style 43 at some point, though maybe not. There's possibly they did actually skip certain numbers. At the time they came out with 45, the 44 already existed. That was top shelf woods, but without anything pearly on it. That was made for a famous a woman guitarist who was also a famous teacher, and that's what she wanted, and that's what she also sold guitars to her students. And Vida Alcott Bickford is her name, but so the 44s were originally made.
Oh, you're serious?
Yeah, were originally made for her, and Lawrence Joubert, one of his signature models was a 44 because they wouldn't let him have top shelf wood unless he got a 45, and he didn't want pearl. He wanted the blank fingerboard. That's what it was. To get a blank fingerboard, his guitar had to be called a 44 if it was going to have level 45 woods. And so they still do that. They still hold to that tradition. I would have to look up in a book to see if there was ever a style 43. But there probably was at one time, and that's probably why they went with 45 when they went super fancy.
Well, before I go throwing numbers around making jokes about this, I have to remember who I'm dealing with. Jeez.
Exactly. So yes. But that's just like Tim, to enjoy a joke at my expense.
It was pretty good. Ramin looked over at the wall, and there's a lot of guitars in the custom shop that are hanging up backwards. And he said to Tim, "Hey, this Maury guy, can you trust him?" And Tim said, "Yeah." And he said, like compared to Spoon, like, is he as trustworthy as Spoon? And Tim's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Is that a compliment?"
Absolutely.
That's what I thought. And then nothing happened. After that, nothing was shown to anybody.
I know nothing. I see nothing. No, I have to say I'm now throwing down a gauntlet because Ramin has not been on this show. And I think it's time it'd be a good opportunity now with NAMM coming up to maybe invite him to come on the show after NAMM to talk about some of the projects he was directly involved in, and to give people an idea of his history with the company and all the great things that he's done at Martin Guitar. I think that'd be really great.
I couldn't agree more, and off the record, on the record, I did remind him, so he's certainly going to make an appearance soon. And Spoon, I have to ask you, how impressed would you be? We've done so many podcasts. Every week we do our very best. How awesome would it be if we stop right here, and this ends up being a 45-minute episode?
I like the way you think. So yes, a nice 45-minute episode for 45 wonderful styles, one way or the other, that led up to Style 45 and the modern D-45 flagship of the Martin guitar line.
Now, the only trick is I don't know if this is 45 minutes until we edit it, so don't laugh if we're off the mark.
I will.
If we're at D43, then you know what I was shooting for the whole time. But from all of us at Maury's Music, including my D45, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.
This has been a presentation of Maury's Music, your trusted source for Martin and Blue Ridge guitars. Find us online at maurysmusic.com.